Welcome, everyone. Please stand and remove your hats. And remain standing until the conclusion of our national anthem. Let us bow our heads for a moment of silence and remember our brave men and women who have died, to think of everyone in our armed forces who are currently serving our nation all around the world. Now will you join me for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, Norton Middle School Chorus and Miss McAuliffe. Of all the times that we gather throughout the year as a whole school and a community, none is more important or more special than our gathering today. I will thank each of you in advance for your respectful attention to our presenters, to the presentations, and to our honored guests throughout the assembly. I would now like to turn it over to Olivia Tenor and Drew McPartlin and have them come to the podium as they're going to lead us through the entire assembly.
Good morning, Norton Middle School. My name is Drew.
And I'm Olivia Tenor.
We are 8th grade members of SUCAL and proud to be part of this year's Memorial Day Assembly. We would like to also introduce our technicians, Audrey Rule and Mario Salzillo. Since we are an institute of education, it's only appropriate that we give you a few history lessons in this morning's assembly. We ask you to listen with respect and please enjoy the presentation. We would now like to recognize our veterans in attendance. Please hold your applause until all the names are read. Ray Jackson, United States Air Force. Jim Slattery, United States Navy. Ed Brault, United States Navy. Chip Metzinger, United States Marine Corps. Roger Marzin, United States Navy. Estelle Flett, United States Army. Bill Wilson, United States Navy. Robert J. Kenny, United States Army. Lawrence Beidel, United States Army. Chris McCarthy, Norton Police and United States Marine Corps. George McAuliffe, United States Army and retired NMS teacher. Bob Briscoe, United States Navy. Gary Cameron, United States Marine. An honored guest, Sergeant Dennett. And Ball Didi.
NMS would like to take the opportunity to show our support for the military families here in Norton. So if you have a family member who is serving or has served, can you please stand and be recognized?
Displayed here in the gym is a poster displaying 50 stars representing our 50 states. Our first video is the history of stars 49 and 50 and how a student not much older than us played an important role in the history of our flag. Please turn your attention above to see how it all unfolded.
Flag has endured in its many forms as the ultimate symbol of freedom, justice, and the American way. But did you know that our nation's flag was designed by a high school student from Ohio?
According to legend, the original American flag from 1776 was sewn by a lady named Betsy Ross. It had 13 stars in a circle representing America's original 13 states. As more states joined the Union, people kept adding more stars to the flag. So by 1958, the U.S. flag had a total of 48 stars for the 48 states of that time. Which brings us to our high school student, Robert Heft. Robert's history teacher gave his students an open-ended assignment.
Make a project illustrating your interest in American history. It could be anything.
So Robert, who was jazzed about hearing that Alaska and Hawaii were going to become states, cut up an old 48-state flag in his grandparents' basement and designed his own vision for a 50-state flag. When he turned in his final assignment, Robert's teacher said,
Anyone can make a flag, and it's got the wrong number of stars.
The grade came back a B-. Robert tried to explain his idea to his teacher, who replied,
I'll change your grade when your flag is accepted by the U.S. Congress.
Game on. Robert wrote 21 letters and called the White House 18 times until one day in 1960, Robert's phone rang.
Robert Hess?
It was President Eisenhower with news that Robert's 50-state flag design had actually been chosen as the new official flag of the United States. The president invited Robert to Washington, where he saw his American flag fly for the first time on July 4th, 1960. Since then, Robert's 50-state flag has remained unmatched as the quintessential symbol of America. But I know what you're thinking. Whatever happened to that B-? Robert's teacher honored his promise and changed the grade to an A.
Dr. Bianca and the Norton Middle School Band will now perform Above and Beyond.
Thank you, Dr. Bianca and the NMS Band. Along with stars, Stu Cal this year focused on decorating our school with the poppy flower. Poppies are very significant on Memorial Day and Veterans Day, which is celebrated in November. This symbol was made popular by the famous poem, In Flanders Field, written by Field Doctor Lieutenant Colonel John McCrae during World War I in Belgium. Dr. McCrae wrote how just a few short days ago they felt the sunset, and how they loved but now lie among the poppies. Please listen politely and carefully to the significance of those words as we celebrate Memorial Day and this poem written so long ago, which is still honored and revered. Joey Kenny will now read In Flanders Field. At the conclusion of the reading, Sergeant Dennett will play Amazing Grace.
In Flanders fields the poppies blow, between the crosses row on row, that mark our place, and in the sky, the larks, still bravely singing, fly scarce heard amid the guns below. We are the dead. Short days ago, we lived, felt dawn, saw sunset glow, loved and were loved, and now we lie in Flanders fields. Take up our quarrel with the foe. To you from failing hands we throw the torch. be yours to hold it high. If ye breaks faith with us who die, we shall not sleep, though poppies grow in Flanders fields.
Thank you, Joey and Sergeant Dennett, for that meaningful and heartfelt performance. 161 years ago, the Gettysburg Address was delivered by President Abraham Lincoln. One line from that speech is strikingly interesting. The world will little know, no long remember what we say here, yet we are still reading the speech today with pride and honor. In fact, during Lincoln's funeral, his eulogy was given by Massachusetts Senator Charles Sumner. He called the Gettysburg Address a monumental act. He said that Lincoln was mistaken, that the world will little know, no long remember what we say here. Rather, the senator remarked, the world noted at once and he said what he said and will never cease to remember it. Please direct your full attention to Mukti Arun as she reads the Gettysburg Address.
Fourscore and 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. We are met on a great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who here gave their lives that that nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. But, in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave man, living and dead, who struggled here, have consecrated it far above our poor power to add or detract. The world will little note nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. It is for us, the living, rather to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here, dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause, for which they here gave their flash full measured devotion, that we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom, and that the government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth.
Thank you, Mukti. Let's take a moment now to look at the history of women in the military. We can trace women's roles throughout the military conflicts back to the American Revolution. Nancy Morgan Hart disguised herself as a man to spy on British troops, and many wives, sisters, and cousins followed their loved ones into war and served in many other roles, from cooking, mending, nursing, to even loading cannons. During the American Civil War, women's roles increased in numbers. It's been estimated about 1,000 women disguised themselves as male soldiers to serve.
For their service, these brave women have left an indelible mark that you may recognize today. Clara Barton served as a nurse in the American Civil War, and she was given a special pass to enter the battlefield to tend to the wounded. After the war, Clara Barton founded the American Red Cross. There was another trailblazer, Dorothea Dix, who was named the first superintendent of Army nurses. She was noted for demanding high standards of behavior and training from the nurses. We will now take a few minutes to see the next part of the story, talking about the formation of the WAC, Women's Auxiliary Corps, put on this video.
Welcome to the paper trail. In March 1941, Army Chief of Staff George Marshall wrote, quote, "We must plan for every possible contingency and certainly must provide some outlet for the patriotic desires of our women," close quote. When the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps was formed in May 1942 and Director Ovida Culp Hobby was sworn in to lead, this new group was not part of the U.S. military. Hobby was titled Director. The women were expected to fill military jobs in the United States that would free up men to fight. Women were eager to serve. According to creation of the Women's Army Corps, more than 35,000 women applied for an anticipated 1,000 positions. The first class of 125 enlisted and 440 officer candidates, 40 of whom were African American, reported to the training center at Fort Des Moines on July 20, 1942. It was not intended that the Auxiliary Corps serve overseas, as they were not given the same securities as soldiers. They weren't protected by the Geneva Convention, and they didn't have military life insurance or veterans' health benefits. A few days into the North Africa campaign in the fall of 1942, General Eisenhower asked for 5 Auxiliary Corps officers, some of whom spoke French, to work as executive secretaries. They were followed shortly by a post headquarters company and a signal company, and it became obvious that Auxiliary Corps members would work overseas, so changes were made to the organization. In July 1943, the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps became the Women's Army Corps, with the same protections as male soldiers. Director Ovida Culp Hobby became Colonel Hobby. General Marshall supported the Women's Army Corps. He wrote in a February 15, 1944 letter that, "I am probably the strongest Army advocate of the WAC organization, and I am fully convinced that a great deal of the work of the Army can be better done by women than by men." First Lieutenant Lilia Koch from Roanoke graduated from Hollins University in 1937 and from the University of Virginia in 1940 with a master's degree in history. She trained at Fort Des Moines, Iowa, then served as the personnel officer at the Allied Translator and Interpreter section at Indooroopilly, Brisbane, Australia. Lilia arrived in Australia in May 1944 in a group of 640 Women's Army Corps personnel and were billeted at nearby Urunga Park. According to Queensland World War II Historic Places, the women assigned to Urunga Park found the barracks, quote, somewhat more primitive than those in the United States, with bucket latrines, outside showers, and limited laundry facilities, close quote, but that theirs were better than the men's barracks at the camp. Lilia also served in Manila, Philippines in 1945. She was in charge of supplying interpreters to question Japanese officers who were captured or surrendered, including for the Philippines War Crimes Commission. After the war, Lilia married William Bagby, raised their family in the home she'd grown up in Roanoke, and volunteered in the community. Sergeant Viola Burleson was a high school graduate from Buchanan who worked in an office as a typist before the war. When she enlisted in the Women's Army Corps, she was trained as an Army photographer and served at Marchfield, California with the Army Air Corps. Viola not only took and developed photos, she enlarged maps and aerial reconnaissance photos for Air Corps use. This ultra-large format camera produces an 8 by 10-inch negative for these purposes. After the war, Viola married Joel McCraw and lived with her family in New Hampshire before returning to Roanoke, Virginia. During World War II, more than 150,000 women served in the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps and the Women's Army Corps in North Africa, the Mediterranean, Europe, the Southwest Pacific, China, India, Burma, and the Middle East. Jobs included expected secretarial work, but also car mechanic, photographer, printer, aircraft plotter, armorer, laboratory technician, communications jobs such as switchboard operator or teletype machine, gunnery instructor, electricians, and drivers. The Women's Army Corps expanded both in number and in jobs over the 36 years of its existence. In 1978, the U.S. Army abolished the Women's Army Corps, and women were fully integrated into the Army.
It should be noted that the Navy was the first to enlist women into the reserves called the Waves in 1917. The Air Force, Marine Corps, and Coast Guard all followed suit in allowing women to serve starting soon after World War II. It is now my pleasure to introduce this morning's speaker, Officer Chris McCarthy of the Norton Police Department.
Thank you very much. Good morning. First and foremost, I would like to thank the middle school faculty, staff, and administration for their tireless efforts throughout the school year for giving our students here the best possible educational experience. Also, I'd like to thank you for taking the time out of their busy schedules to recognize our veterans on this beautiful Friday at the beginning of our Memorial Day weekend. To the students, you should be immensely proud of this spectacular presentation. What a phenomenal job by all. I am truly taken back. 100% professional grade. Outstanding job. To our own Norton veterans seated here before us, if not for your courage, sacrifice, trials and tribulations, and the dedication to an idea bigger than yourselves, numerous generations have been able to enjoy the very freedoms we have today. For that, we can only thank you. You have passed the torch to veterans who came after you for the responsibility of the safety and security of our way of life, where freedom truly wins the day. We can only give our deepest thanks and gratitude for all you have done. Thank you. And thank you. And just on a personal note, if I may, as we step into this long weekend, let kindness, respect, and a sense of strong community win the day, where we come together as one and treat everybody we make contact with the respect and dignity they deserve. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Officer McCarthy. Before we get to taps, if you are wondering what you can do to celebrate and honor our military this weekend, here are some ideas. Take some time to quietly reflect on the freedoms we enjoy here in the great country because of our fallen heroes. Take some time to visit the grave of a loved one who served. Bring a flower to leave as a sign of remembrance. If you see a veteran wearing a military hat, greet them with a smile and thank them for their service. Go out of your way to do an act of kindness and simply serve your fellow man.
A tradition all over this country and here at NMS is the playing of taps. We would like to remind you of how it all began with this brief history. At the conclusion of the video, taps will be played by Dr. Peter Bianca and Miss Colleen McAuliffe. It is important to note that there will be echoing taps. It is a tradition to remove your hats and stand as taps are played. After taps has concluded, we ask for your complete silence as our guests exit the assembly, and please no clapping as a sign of respect.
In 1862, Union General Daniel Butterfield and his brigade bugler, Oliver Wilcox Norton, revised an earlier bugle call to create the 24 notes we know today as taps. The new call quickly spread throughout the Union Army and was soon used even by Confederates to signal the end of the day. Later that same year, at a battlefield funeral, Captain John Tibble chose to forego firing the customary volleys over the grave for fear that he might rouse the enemy. The captain chose the sounding of taps as the most appropriate substitute. Today, sounding taps at ceremonies is the most sacred duty a bugler can perform. When I sound taps at a funeral, I'm sometimes approached by family members who wish to thank me for being part of the service. To answer "you're welcome" seems inadequate. Instead, I always reply, "It is my honor."